This is the Hancock Shaker Village, where for 170 years, a religious order of 300 people lived the communal life, working and farming the land, and creating some of the most remarkable furniture I've ever seen. And back in that 5-story building, appropriately called the brick dwelling, is where they took their meals and slept. The rooms are immaculate. It's almost like they haven't even left. Come on. Well, after a hard day's work out here at the Hancock Shaker Village, the brothers and sisters would retire to this level. The brothers coming up this staircase and staying on this side of the hallway, and the sisters coming up this staircase and staying on this side of the hallway. Now, there were several retiring rooms up on this floor. This one was set up for 4 brothers, and I'd like to read you one of the rules. All should retire to rest in the fear of God, without any playing or boisterous laughing. And the thing I like the most, and lie straight. Let's take a look inside. In almost every room in this building, you'll find one of these, a little wood stove. And I'm sure that was a welcome amenity on those cold winter nights here in western Massachusetts, especially before you had to jump into bed. Boy, in a bed that doesn't feel very comfortable to me. But you have to remember, these people worked very hard during the day. And when it was time for them to sack out, I guess they didn't need as much comfort as we demand. And look over here, a classic, a shaker box, oval-shaped and made from very thin pieces of wood. But it's sitting on a beautiful chest of drawers. The top, pumpkin pine, full width, a 24-inch board. And the side, too, another full-width board. Very nicely proportioned. Look at the front of it. 2 small drawers at the top, and then the full-width drawers get wider and wider as we move down. And here's something I've never seen before. 2 more smaller drawers down at the bottom. And they went even one step further. They suspended another drawer under the base. Boy. Now look at this base. It's a separate unit, really, that the whole chest sits on. And the corners have been dovetailed. And that's for beauty as well as strength. Let's see if they did the dovetails to the drawers. Sure enough, all beautifully hand-cut dovetails, a sign of true craftsmanship. Also note that on the front of the drawer, there's a little lip here, a rounded edge, the only decorative detail. The Shakers really didn't believe in much decoration. Really, function was the important thing to them. Each drawer has a lip on the sides and the top, but not on the bottom. And let's take a look inside. Fairly simple, a wooden frame for the drawer to slide on, and that's been let into these sideboards. And I'm sure dado has been chiseled in there, stopping just short of this front so that you get this kind of joint. I think there's a lot of good ideas in this chest, so maybe I should take some measurements. The materials that I need for my chest of drawers are several pieces of Ponderosa pine, 1x12, 1x10, 1x8, and 1x6 in varying lengths, and a sheet of 1/4-inch Luan plywood, which will be for the drawer bottoms and the back of the chest of drawers. Now, the only difficult thing in building this chest of drawers is finding the 1/2-inch stock for the drawer construction. The front's a 3/4-inch material, but the sides and the back are 1/2-inch pine. Now, you might be able to find some at your home center already milled up, but it's very difficult to find. The Shakers would be horrified, but you could substitute some 1/2-inch plywood. The only problem with plywood is that sometimes it might have some voids in it. And if you want to not get into that problem, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money and buy cabinet-grade plywood, which doesn't have voids, and several more laminations. The other alternative is to rip the stock on your table saw. Now, even here, this is one of my pieces for the drawer. If I make one pass with the blade at maximum height, it'll cut this much. And on the second pass, it'll cut this much, which means I have a whole area that I can't rip down to 1/2-inch. So that means I'd have to rip smaller pieces and somehow glue them up. But here in the shop, I've got a surface planer. Now this machine does two things. It'll smooth the surface of a board as well as reduce its thickness. So I'm going to take some 3/4 inch stock and by making several passes through the planer, reduce it to 1/2 inch. Watch. First thing that I did to start my chest of drawers was to glue up some stock for the sides and for the top. And unlike the drawers where I wanted single pieces, for the top I want to use several pieces, and in this case 4 boards glued together. And believe it or not, this is going to give me more stability and strength. And over here I have 2 pieces that have been glued up for the sides of the chest of drawers. And notice how I've alternated the grain for that greater stability. Now the first thing that I'm actually going to build are the drawer frames. And that's these pieces on which the drawers ride. And if you were to take one out of the chest, you would see that it's assembled with just a simple tongue and groove construction. I'll start out by making the tongue in the long pieces, and I've set up the table saw with a dado blade, which can be adjusted for varying widths. It's 2 blades, and I've set it up so it'll be exactly in the center of this piece of stock, 1/4 inch wide, and we'll cut a 1/2 inch depth. To join the short pieces to the long pieces, I need to make a tongue that fits into the groove like this. Now to do that, I've changed the setup on the saw a little bit. I've widened the dado head cutter to take a wider path, and I've put a gauge block on because I'm using the rip fence in combination with the T-square, and I don't want any kickback or bind up. And by running each piece through and flipping it, I'll get a tongue. Now it's just a matter of putting some glue on each of the joints, sticking them together. You know, because I'm building 5 of these frames, and I want them to all come out exactly the same, it's worth building a little jig for assembly. And you can see I just took a scrap piece of plywood here and screwed some cleats on, so that I ended up with a perfect 90-degree angle here. And I know that when I lay each piece in the frame, each frame into the jig, that it'll be perfectly square. And I just secure each joint with a little brad until the glue dries up. Now to join the frames to the side of my drawer case, I'm going to use a couple different types of joints. This is called a rabbet joint, and I'll use this at the top and the bottom of the case. And for the intermediate frames, I'll use what's called a dado joint. Now notice how I've stopped removing material about 3/4 inch from the front of the side. And that's because I want this nice, clean butt joint type of look, rather than having the dado show through the end of the piece of wood. Now I'll do that on the table saw with the dado head set in place and a piece of wood here to protect the blade from the metal fence. And I've put 2 marks here, which are indicators which will show me where to start and stop so that I'll get that 3/4 inch remaining on the front of the piece. Okay, one final rabbet in the side pieces, 3/8 by 3/8, and I'll show you what that's for. We want to be able to recess the plywood in the back of the cabinet, and that'll allow us to set that in. Now there's one more thing that has to be done to these side pieces. All the rabbets and dados that we've made have to be chiseled out so that they're square. And I'll just do that with an ordinary chisel. Well, one final operation while I've still got the dado set up in the saw is to make this notch. And that allows me to put the frames in behind the blind dado pocket. Like that. So now a little bit of glue, some nails, and we can start to see what this chest of drawers is going to look like. Now, the glue is really what holds this together. You want to think of these nails as just little miniature clamps. Before I glue the back on, I'm going to check the diagonal measurements. And since these are equal, I know the case is square. And now I can nail my plywood in place. Now this little piece of wood separates the two top drawers. And speaking of drawers, we're ready for some drawer construction. I want to show you a little detail on all the drawers in our chest. On the front piece of the drawer, there's a lip, so that when the drawer is set in the case, it fits right up against the frame, like that. And to do that, I use my table saw again, with the dado head set in place, and I'll do each end and the top of each drawer front. Let's take another look at our drawer construction. You notice that the sides are connected to the front with this dovetail joinery. And this is not only aesthetic, but also serves a purpose of holding the drawer together. An ordinary joint, constant pulling of the drawer would fall apart. But with these wedge shapes of the dovetail, there's no way that that's ever going to pull apart. It'll last forever. Of course, in the old days, those were cut with a chisel and hand saws. But today in the shop, I can cut the same dovetail in a few seconds with a router. The router has a carbide tip dovetailing bit and this little collar right here, which will ride in my dovetailing jig. Now I've installed the side of my drawer and the front of my drawer, and if I follow the instructions correctly for my template, I'll get a perfect dovetail every time. Okay, now the instructions call for me to remove the side piece, make an adjustment to the top gauge, and make another pass on that front piece. Okay, now we can unclamp the whole thing. See how it fits together. Perfect. Now let's take a look at how the sides are joined to the back of the cabinet. Just a simple dado joint with a little glue and some nails. And I'll do the dado joint right here over on the table saw with the gauge block and the dado head, being careful to take my side pieces with the dovetails, this being the outside, this being the inside of the drawer, placing the inside down and making my groove. And now for the last dado of the day, this one right here. And that helps support our plywood bottom for the drawer. Now I'll do that to both sides and the front. Now I've got my router table set up here with the router mounted underneath and a 1/4 inch rounding over bit. And I'm going to round over all 4 edges of my drawer front, being sure to do the edge grain first to minimize chipping on a finished edge. Now that is never going to come apart. And now our plywood bottom, which just slides into the 1/4 inch dados and doesn't get any glue, just sits in there loose. Now the back does get glued and nailed together. Okay, now I'll check the drawer for square by taking diagonal measurements. And with those equal, I can secure the plywood to the back of the drawer, and notice that the plywood runs over the back of the drawer. Now our chest of drawers is supported by a base, and this does 2 things. It holds the drawer case up so the bottom drawer won't be right on the floor, and it's been carved out so it's easy to clean underneath it. Also on the corners we use the dovetail construction not only for strength but for beauty. Now I'll do the dovetailing for my base, again with the dovetail template, and I want the dovetail joints to show on the front of my base, so I've positioned the pieces differently than we did with on the drawer. This is now the front and this is the side. All right, with the base loosely assembled, I'm ready to lay out for the cutouts. And I made a template so that they'll all match. Now on the side, it's just a simple matter of marking from each edge as they intersect in the middle. But on the front, I'll have to mark the arc on each side. And then I'll connect the 2 points together using a straight edge. Frankly, it's quite a luxury to have a bandsaw like this in the shop, but it sure does a great job. With the assembly together and sanded, I'm ready to put these cleats down, which will actually support the drawer case. Now this little molding detail is done with the router table fitted with a coving bit. Okay, a little bit of glue, and I'm ready to fasten the base to the bottom of the drawer case, and I'll do that with just a few screws. Now this bothers me right here. This is the back of the base, and this is a little fragile standing on its own. So I'm going to put these angle blocks in here to help support it, and they won't be seen from the front of the chest of drawers. one of the last things I have to do is cut my top to size. And I'm going to use my homemade panel cutter, which is nothing more than a big T-square. Okay, I've pre-drilled some holes to fasten the top, and in the center it's just a regular hole. But in the front and the back I've got a slot, and that'll allow the top to expand and contract with changes in humidity. So now at the top, flush with the back of the case and overhanging the sides about 1 inch, I'm ready to fasten it down with some regular screws. Well, I think that adds a nice little touch to our top, don't you? And I did that with my router and a 1/2-inch beating bit. Now it's some time for some fine sanding, and we'll be ready to put some finish on it. Well, before I do any staining of a project, I want to make up some samples, and that's what I did here. I took a piece of pine that's similar to the material that the case was built out of. And on this side, I put some stain just on the raw pine, untreated. And you can see how dark and blotchy it is. But over on this side, I prepared the wood first by using a pre-stained sealer. And then I put the stain on, and you can see the effect. It's a much more uniform staining job, and that's the color I want. So the next step is to put the pre-stained sealer on all the display surfaces. Well, the color of the stain that I've chosen for the chest of drawers is sort of a honey maple. And I can put it on with either a brush or a rag. I'm using a brush here, just giving it a nice even coat. And depending on how long I leave this sit on here and how much I rub it when I take off the excess will really determine the final color. Well, now that my stain has dried, I'm putting on a sanding sealer. And this will dry quickly, and hopefully it won't pick up too much dust. And this will provide me with the perfect foundation for my final coats of polyurethane. And now I'm ready to put the first coat of satin finished polyurethane. Well, after a final sanding, I'm ready for the last coat of polyurethane, which is going to give me a durable, attractive finish for many years.